everybody. Today I have my good friend, Andy Hite from Scaling Minds. Andy, you were just telling me before the show we started recording, I got to jump into this real quick. You helped a company in the seven-figure range, service business, I assume, with their whole leadership team and helped them grow revenue 40% over the last year or two, working with their team and coaching them specifically. So, this industry in coaching, there's a lot of junk out there. I want to hear, like, where's the real value in coaching? What do you do to come into an organization and get the team working that much better?
Yeah, so it was a 2-year engagement. The first year I was working with the CEO exclusively. She's a very operational CEO, not much strategy. So we spent most of that time just kind of getting her out of the weeds. And then the second year, we included her leadership team of 7, 8 plus her. And really trying to remove every friction point that we could find and get them super aligned in what their mission was and how they execute that strategy. When we can kind of get all of those obstacles and friction points, whether it be just tactical communication, making sure everybody's department is responsible for X, Y, or Z and autonomous in that. It kind of turns it into a bit of a well-oiled machine that can scale. So that's what we did with them, combination of one-on-one coaching with each leader, team coaching, bringing them to the table, just drawing stuff out of them that they wouldn't otherwise be communicating, the issues, the problems, the personalities, and just getting them talking. And like, I always use like a rowing machine, a rowing canoe or a canoe. You get 8 leaders in there and they're all just kind of rowing in different directions at different tempos. We want to get everybody rowing in the same direction towards the same thing. And when we do that, we can grow revenues by 40% and the workforce by 25%.
Super cool. Yeah, I think this is something that I want to hear your thoughts on before we get into the meat of today's conversation. But coaching comes in different flavors, right? And I don't want to knock any of it because I think it's all got use at different points in your career life, whatever. There's the kind of coaching that is more tactical, like a more experienced business person I could say hire to tell me step by step how do I implement this thing and build a better sales process or whatever I want to do. And then there's this more what I would call what you do, which is a little more fundamental human communication and mindset coaching. Maybe is that how I describe it? Now, describe to me the difference between those two and how you think about it.
Yeah. So in our sort of title of our business, we're Scaling Minds Coaching and Consulting. Right. I look at, the sort of business coach that you were talking prior, that's really consulting. That person's been down the road. They're just kind of helping that person implement systems and knowledge and that kind of thing. When I talk about coaching, and you're right, that term is just way overused and there's just millions of people saying they're a coach. What I look for and what I'm interested in there is really the human aspect, right? There's the doing, which is the consulting, and the being of the human that does the thing, right? The human is the captain of the ship. So the more EQ they have, the more self-awareness they have, the more they can make shifts in how they show up as a leader, not just what they do. And what we find is when we can sort of up-level the human being, the leader, they're able to pull the lever of what they do so much more effectively.
So love it. That is a great segue for what we're going to talk about today, because one of the when we work together, and full disclosure, we used to work together. I as your client coaching me, and so I really love that. It's super valuable to me. And one of the things that I really worked on with you a lot was like managing fear is what I would call it. And I see this all the time as I talk to entrepreneurs, just like at all stages, no matter how big and small, that a lot of their limitations come from internal fear and not any real limitation, quote unquote, no real tactical limitation, right? And so let's talk about fear. Let's start like fundamentally. What is fear? Why does it happen? What is it for? What was it? Why do we even feel it at all?
100%. When we're growing up, when we're kids, we don't yet know what the world is. And the only way we're taught what the world is through the people around us, whether that be parents, whether that be siblings, religions, anybody that comes in contact with a young child has an imprint on them. If you look at your parents and they might be a little bit scarcity mindset, and you probably are too. They teach us how to view the world. And so much of what our fear is nowadays is programmed basically from when we were a kid, because you can look around, right? Two different people may have very different levels of fear or risk aversion. It's not the risk that's there, it's their view of the risk based on their sort of internal makeup. And so the more that we can help an individual understand who they are, not or outside of what their surroundings are, when we can understand who they are, what their limitations, what their thoughts and processes and fears are, then they can start to shift them because they can see it, right? That's what we call a blind spot. But yeah, all fear is taught and comes typically from when we were young and impressionable.
Interesting. It's funny because I actually just saw some article about how babies have babies have no natural fear of snakes. Like, it's such a random thing, right? But it is 100% of adults have a certain level of fear of snakes, unless you're Steve Irwin and, like, unless you condition yourself against it, essentially. But it's really interesting because, fear has a natural purpose that is very useful. And the conditioning that humans do to each other as we grow up to build fear had at one point, and still does, in a lot of contexts, has a super useful purpose. I mean, not getting bit by a snake, big deal. Like, you're going to survive if you teach your kids not to get bit by snakes. But what it doesn't translate well to, in my opinion, and just where we've talked a lot, is into modern fears. The fears we have now are much more abstract. They are not the tiger bearing down on me anymore. And in my brain, I'm still thinking that way, but in reality, it's much more complex. Let's talk about that a bit more. Like, what does modern fear even look like?
Yeah, it's really you talked about the tiger, the saber-toothed tiger. To get into the weeds a little bit, we're still kind of operating on a nervous system that was designed for thousands of years ago. It's not too long ago where this internet thing didn't exist, where phones and technologies and things that really have sped up our world and how we engage with the world, it's all so new. And back in the day, a lot of times your fear was staying within the tribe, because if you were to be kicked out of the tribe, what does that mean? Probably certain death. You don't have the protections, you don't have the resources, and you're just out. Oftentimes, that's what our nervous system is doing today. And it's not really needed, because our life isn't in danger the way it was, but sometimes it feels like it is. The feeling based on, our nervous system sometimes tells us, oh my gosh, our very existence is at risk. And that's how the fear kind of embeds. But that in and of itself isn't true. And so that's why, again, I think this work is so helpful, is it helps us gain perspective and what really should be fearful and really what shouldn't, and what doesn't need to be, at least at this point. And I was working with a client this morning, and they're a relatively new entrepreneur, and as it can be an up and down roller coaster of, especially this person's in consulting, and their tickets are quite large, so they don't come in every day. And he was kind of freaking out. Part of what happens is we have this fear and we go to the worst case scenario of, oh, we're going to fail or we're going to become homeless. And so a lot of times what we have to do is, to combat the fear, is look at the facts. What really are the facts, right? And this gentleman has plenty of runway. This gentleman has tons of pipeline. It's just not people signing. And so it's kind of getting perspective on the facts so that the fear can kind of rest a little bit.
Yeah, even when you say these things that people are afraid of, failure, it's such an abstract thing to be afraid of. Like, what does that mean in real terms? You kind of equated it earlier, which I like this analogy of, like, it's like we're afraid fundamentally of getting kicked out of our tribe and dying out in the wilderness alone. That doesn't happen when you have to close a business. Like, let's say you go bankrupt, you don't get kicked out of your family and die alone in the street. I mean, possibly extreme cases, there's something like that could happen. But like, this is extremely rare, right? Like, most people that when they have this abstract fear of failure, it is not that. It is really the worst case scenario is I can't make payroll. Like, that sucks. That's terrible. But you're not dead. Like, you're going to survive it. You're going to figure out a way.
You're going to make it.
Yeah. And so this is something that to me, again, logically, my brain can immediately make that connection and say, you're right, Andy. I shouldn't be afraid of anything. Like, yeah, but why don't I? Why doesn't that happen? Why is it so hard to really get beyond the logical piece there?
Because those fears are based on emotions, right? Or the emotions stem from the fears, and they just don't turn off, right? The nervous system has these beliefs baked in them, right? Because many of us have been around 30, 40, 50 years, and you don't just flip a switch and change those belief systems. And that really is the work. We talk a little bit about neuroplasticity. Back in the 50s, they used to think you were baked once you got to adulthood. One thing we've learned over the past 70 years is that's actually not true. We actually can fundamentally change who we are and how we engage with the world. Doesn't mean it's easy. In fact, it's very difficult, but it can be done. A person that is afraid, for instance, of spiders, with a little bit of exposure therapy, can turn that fear into a realistic knowledge that, oh, that thing's not going to hurt me. Same thing with us, whether it be an entrepreneur or that kind of thing, we can shift it.
Yeah, let's definitely. I'll put a pin in the sort of like getting beyond the fears, because I do think that's a good tactical thing to talk about. But let's start with a bit more into exploring the fears that entrepreneurs have. You hear a lot of versions of this. I hear a lot of versions of this. Whether it's I was talking to a couple of business owners that are looking to possibly exit their business in the next couple of years, and this last week, and both of them had these like very tangible things that they were saying is like, I don't want to do X because I'm afraid of Y. And I just, I want to go into like coach mode and start helping them get over that fear. Right. But like, it's not the call we're on. Like, I know it wasn't my role at the time, but it is really like, it's interesting to see these in entrepreneurs, especially because, from the outside, a lot of people think of entrepreneurs as like fearless and like we're out here treading new lines, but we all have fears. Like, what are some of the common fears you hear from entrepreneurs, and where do they really stem from? Like, what are some of these root things that are happening?
Yeah, depending on the type of client, if consulting, for example, that kind of thing, where's the next client coming from? Am I doing the right thing? The world of an entrepreneur is very lonely. And oftentimes they don't have the support system. Am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing something? Am I going to fail? Am I going to embarrass myself? Most of this comes from uncertainty, right? We are a people who like certainty. When we are certain, we feel safe. When things aren't sure, we feel afraid. And that's typically where it comes from.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's almost like fear is the default setting, and this ability to overcome that and just move into that uncertainty is kind of the thing you have to push through, right? Or that's the work, right?
100%. I think it really is our default. We are here, we exist, but we want to look out for dangers so that we don't die, so that we don't injure ourselves, so that our family and our communities are safe. I think it is our default to look out for danger.
The default state here is, avoid uncertainty, right? Like, I think, again, if we're going to I'm going to remove the word fear and put it over here, but like, let's just call this thing out here uncertainty, like growing my business, where that next client's coming from, how I'm going to make enough money to pay payroll, how I'm going to, continue this business growth over the next 10 years, and like all that stuff. How am I going to pay off the debt I have, the whatever, all these things. They're all uncertainty, essentially. Like, we don't know the answer, and that's what makes them scary. So the default setting, it seems, is it's uncertainty. So avoid it, or find a way to like, I think there's two options. You either avoid it or you find a way to fight through and like solve it. Right. And I think that the default is what most people take, which is just avoid it. Like, that's why they don't start companies, right?
Everybody has their version of fight, freeze. But yes, the best of the best. I was talking to that client this morning, and I was like, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because when you can do that, you can fight through it. You can regain perspective. You can find the path forward without, fight, freeze. So that we don't stop. Because yes, that typically is the thing that gets in everyone's way. They become fearful and they stop.
Yeah.
Right. And what is the famous quote? Everything you ever wanted is on the other side of your fear. It's like, just keep going.
Yeah. I was thinking about this this week. I'm reading Ego is the Enemy. It's a kind of stoicism book. And,
Ryan Holiday.
Yeah, Ryan Holiday. So I like his other books and, pick this one up. And one of the things that kept coming back to me as I was thinking about this conversation we were going to have is, a lot of this fear is ego driven as well. So when people say things like fear of failure, I often and even in myself, when I say, I'll even just say this personally, when a couple years ago would talk about my biggest fears, it was like fear of failure. It was really fear of being perceived as a failure by other people, and which is really an ego problem at the fundamental root. It was, I have this inflated view of myself that I want to project on the world. Therefore, I can't do anything that might put me in that, what might, be seen as a failure to other people mode. And I still struggle with it. I mean, I'll say, I think this is still something I'm working on. What do you do when you're coaching entrepreneurs around this ego thing? Because we all have it, and a lot of us who do this, we're ambitious, we have ego, it's part of our brand. How do we get beyond that though?
First, I think is recognizing that the thing that is in the way is the ego, is our as you said, our fear of being perceived as a failure, or our fear of, a lot of it is absolutely just external perception. And, a lot of times the conversations are around, great, so that's there. How is it helping you? Most people are like, well, it's not. It's actually hurting me. Okay. So let's just take one step in the direction of that fear so that we keep moving. And then you're going to learn, you're going to see nobody cares. Literally nobody cares. Everybody is worried about their own business, their own life. And they don't have time worrying, is Andy or Karl making a massive success or failure? They may notice it if somebody were to shutter their doors, but they're not thinking about it, right? And so if we waste our time worried about what other people are thinking, it is just that. It is a waste of time because no one cares.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I was just listening to a podcast where there's a guy who's a bodybuilder talking about the fear that people have around going to the gym for the first time. A lot of people who are not pro bodybuilders, and everybody has their first time going to the gym, right? Even if you are now a pro bodybuilder, they had a first time. Anyway, his point was you go to the gym and the fear is everybody's looking at me and judging me and thinking about me. The truth is every single person in that gym is looking in the mirror at themselves. That is 100% their focus, right? You're a weirdo if you're looking at other people and think about them. That's creepy and strange. Nobody does that. And I think about myself too. I go to the gym on a couple times a week and I'm like, yeah, I never think about who's there. I don't even look at their faces. I don't even think about it.
Just look around because they're all kind of looking at their biceps. They're looking at their waistline. They don't care about you. They don't care about my dad bod.
Exactly. We're all there to work on ourselves, right? And that's again, once you realize that, that it does make it easier. I think agreed to be more open about your own fear as a limitation, or just your own failures too, which I think is really empowering. Another thing I hear a lot, and I know we've talked about this a lot, is there's kind of this inherent fear of growth that happens. And again, it comes down to this fear of the unknown in entrepreneurship. But here's the way I hear it a lot is entrepreneur comes and says it's amazing you're growing your business. I want to just stay small. A little flag goes off in my head whenever I hear that. I'm like, do you really? Or is that just literally the fear just telling you growing means going through a little bit of pain, going through a little bit of growth, going through a little bit of personal change, and you don't want that in your life, which that's fair. But what's your take on that, or how do you coach entrepreneurs who say that kind of thing and just say, I just want to stay small, I just don't want to grow because that's going to push me in, or going to be hard or scary, or I'm going to have to hire people or fire people, whatever. What do you do there?
I think there's the one that knows that that's why they're playing small. And there are definitely those that don't know it, that keep themselves small, but are fighting internally because they want to grow. Yes, if we were to stack up some successes and we'll grow, it's going to require us to be a little bit more visible. It's going to require us to take on a little bit more risk. You know, if you're hiring, you have more responsibility. Um, and you're right, there are those that the prospect of that is very daunting and scary. And so they'll shrink themselves. Um, Oftentimes, this comes up quite a bit in coaching conversations. And I was alluding to a lot of times it's kind of hidden. You know, you've heard the term self-sabotage. Some people will unknowingly sabotage themselves to stay small. And what we want to do is bring some awareness around it, root it out so that then it's at least a choice, you know. You're shying away from, you know, hiring these two people because you think it's that you want to invest, you don't want to invest the money. But look at your reserves. You have the money. What is it about not bringing them on so that you can grow? Oh, well, I'm just afraid of what leading those people is going to feel like because of past work trauma. You know, I've done that, and this I see this a lot. You know, past work trauma or past businesses really inform the future. And it's like, no, like you're a different person. You can be a different person. Let that be in the past and let's move forward.
Yeah. I was just talking to an entrepreneur who has a business much, much, much larger than mine, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 times bigger, you know, so many, many millions of dollars in the 8-figure range. And he is talking about how it has taken him 5 years of like kind of back and forth fear, managing that fear, whatever, to bring in a CEO to then run his company. You know, it's big enough that he wants to step back and kind of just be a board member. And it's at a point where it's probably bigger than he is qualified to run it. You know, this is kind of what happens to a lot of entrepreneurs. We're good at the starting phase. And at some point we have to realize we should be back off and let real professionals run the business. Right. And he's at that point. But to take 5 years, it was like, I realized this guy's got, you know, in a way, his fear is greater because he has so much more to lose in this thing than I do. And I thought there's actually this advantage to being small and taking big outsized risks or things like, again, we're putting in a CEO of one of the businesses and we're thinking about that for the other one and think, you know, down the road. And it's like, I'm not going to take 5 years. I'm going to make, you know, an attempt. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, we'll try it again. You know, like it'll just be, I'll get 5 reps in 5 years. And I think, again, it's not that I'm any better, smarter, whatever. It's like I have so much less to lose in this case because he's, you know, again, I don't have a business the same size that is under the same stricture. Like, what do you do when you see these entrepreneurs that have so much baked into their business, especially as you get to that size where it's like going to be extremely hard to ever replicate this, and they've kind of got their whole this sunk cost kind of in it. When they struggle with these things like fear around this, is it any different? Is it the same kind of fundamental thing, just helping them see that fear and recognize it?
It's essentially the same mechanics. It's just, as you were saying, they feel as if there's more at stake, right? And so, yeah, it comes back to creating more and more self-awareness around it. Is it true that there's more at stake? I mean, yes, that is true, but is it true that you're at risk of losing or failing or anything going wrong? So a lot of times what we do is we just start looking at the fundamentals. You know, this business is fundamentally strong. It has a strong pipeline. All right, well then let's let that rest. Let's lean on the facts that we know, have the bullseye out in the future, the goal, and keep going because you don't have any information. I always go back to information and facts to tell you that we're in trouble, that you're in trouble, that you need this level of fear.
You've said this a lot to me, and you're saying this now, is look at data, real data, to tell you if you should be afraid or not. And that's so makes 100% perfect sense. What I think the challenge is that a lot of entrepreneurs, yes, they can zoom out a little bit and look at the real data, but they're often so stuck in the weeds that they get distracted by what I'll call as anecdata, which is like, a client just called me this morning and said he's got to cancel and wants a refund. You know, like that happens. And all of a sudden it's like, that is the only data they're looking at, even though it's one data point out of 100 or whatever. Right. Like, so I think part of, to me, the way that you can get that perspective is to be removed from the day-to-day and running of your business and those little like piddly issues like that. And I think that's something that's like, again, very hard to do, but at the same time, it gets a lot easier when you can zoom out a bit more.
Yeah, this is something that you're exceptional at, is removing yourself where you're not actually needed. If I could give that gene that you have to a lot of my clients, dude, I'd be doing very well right now. But yeah, like, a lot of times the conversation is around, is this even your role? Right? I was talking earlier about the sort of case study that we shared. That CEO was very operational, and I'm like, you should not be this operational. You have a COO for that. Why are they not overseeing this and you out creating relationships and developing strategy and new offerings? So that's what you're focused on, not necessarily, as you mentioned, somebody pulling out of an agreement or that kind of thing, because that's not going to help you.
Yeah, the thing I've observed and that helps me, again, it comes back to data, is like really objectively looking at those things and saying, does this decision, problem, fire, or whatever it is, does it matter in 5 years? And if the answer is like maybe, then you zoom out further. You say, does it matter in 10 years? Like, all right, I can't worry about it that much. Like there's too many bigger things we're in. Whereas often I think like it's easy to blow that thing up in your mind because it matters today. Like absolutely today, that is the biggest thing happening at the company. You just had a big client back out, right? But again, zoom out 5 years. Does it matter? Probably not. Like in the grand scheme of our lives, like as business owners, we're going to go through hundreds of clients, thousands of clients, tens of thousands of customers, whatever it is. If one single client matters that much to you, you've got like a fundamental problem in the business anyway. So I think that to me is something too, where again, us working together and just looking at data is like the data needs to tell you, does this matter in 5 years or not? And if you can say no, then it's something you can't worry about.
Have you read Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game? Are you familiar with
I
that
don't
book?
think so. I can't remember if we've talked about that, but yeah, give me the rundown.
Well, it's kind of what we're talking about. Oftentimes in business, we are playing a finite game, which is like very what's in front of us and the wins and losses that are immediate right here. And the infinite game is like, yeah, hopefully if you're an entrepreneur and you love what you're doing, what you're building, you're gonna be doing this for a long time, right? Or at least until you get to your exit or whatever your goal is. And so we need to work to zoom out to see the big picture, the long game, versus the day-to-day ups, the blips of day-to-day, because those are going to drive you insane if that's where you're focusing.
Yeah. Yeah, we're starting to get into this. So let's just full on dive into like solutions. So we all have fear, and at different levels that fear looks different maybe, but it's fundamentally a lot of stuff is just unfounded. What's your pathway to starting to be aware of those fears and then start to address them?
Yeah. Well, the first step is to get the person in front of me to clearly and fully articulate the fear they're experiencing. Feelings can be often big, broad brushes. I'm afraid. And usually, when we can get to granular on exactly what that fear is and what the words behind it are, it becomes so much easier to kind of look at it and dispel it, or at least table it, or say it's not an immediate thing. So the very first thing is to get intimate with what is it that we're actually feeling, and not just a big broad brush of fear. That's number one. And number two is to keep looking in that mirror and facing that fear day in and day out. And when we do that, we learn that it's probably just like the spider example. Oh, this is the 10th time I've held it and it didn't bite me. Maybe I don't need to be as afraid. This is why this work can be very confronting, because in order to gain traction, we constantly have to face the fear. We have to move in the direction of the fear. A lot of times in this work, we talk about like our comfort zone, right? We want to stay right within that sphere of our comfort zone, but growth happens outside. And that's what we do. We just keep pushing and challenging. And when we do that, just like going into the gym, when you keep putting that bicep under stress, it grows. Same thing with us.
Yeah. I think a lot of mental skills are like that in very I see it personally. I've seen it in very discrete ways that like things like facing fears and repeatedly, exposing yourself to slightly more larger fears or whatever they are, it does eventually break down that barrier and makes it like something you can actually solve with no worries. I mean, I remember just very, very tangible here. I remember early days after every time I get off of a call with like a prospective client, I'm just like, oh, are they going to sign or not? Like I'd stay up all night worrying about whether I said the right thing, like just in hindsight, like such small stuff. Like how was I afraid of that? Now 5 years in and I'm like, yeah, I don't worry about sales calls at all. Like I don't worry about like nothing matters. None of that matters. And so it's a level of perspective that you only get by doing it over and over. If I had said on day one, man, sales is hard for me, I don't like it, I'm going to quit doing it. Like, A, I would be out of business, but B, like I wouldn't be here saying like, yeah, sales calls, whatever. Like I'll jump and do it in my sleep. So I think it's huge to see that progression. And I see the same things in things like self-discipline. Like when I notice in my own life, when I get really self-disciplined about one or two things, it starts to stack up and it hits on more and more things. And I'm like, then I'm like looking for ways to optimize my discipline around every single area of my life, and it gets obsessive. But there's probably something there too from my personality type. But yeah, it's interesting. I think fear is very much like that, where it's this thing you've got to constantly keep addressing, or else you'll get it'll start to take over.
100%. And the really cool thing that I get to see in my work is when that client is courageous enough to want to make that kind of growth and stays in the game, what ends up happening is they do become comfortable being uncomfortable, meaning facing fears, there becomes this awareness that, oh, like I know I can, I have the feeling, I have the fear, but I know I can move out in this direction. And actually, I know I'm going to gain some traction. So people do and can become comfortable being uncomfortable with practice. And then really cool things can happen because, as you say, you can stack growth.
The other thing that I find about fear is it's an energy consumer. And not just is it something that you end up spending time trying to solve the fear or mitigate the fears or whatever, but also the mental energy it consumes is huge because it becomes the like distracting background noise that you just can't get rid of, right? And to me, that part of it is so expensive as an entrepreneur. So again, personal example, like a lot of entrepreneurs get stuck in what we call in agencies, the feast famine cycle of like, hey, lots of clients coming in, so I'm busy, so I'm going to do lots of work and heads down. And then they do no business development, and they 6 months later say, oh shit, I don't have any leads, and now I've got nothing to do, and they're just scrambling for leads, right? This is a common thing, and it's all this like fear reaction of like from just. People get stuck in that and they're afraid to get out of it because that means changing something really big and really fundamental, right? And so anyway, I think where I'm going with this is like the more you get used to breaking out of that fear cycle, the easier it is to do it again and again and again and again. And then you can actually start to get the time and mental energy freed up to listen to people who are doing things the right way, and like actually take advice from other people and actually start to absorb knowledge from other people. Yeah.
I think what you said is so spot on. It is such an energy consumer, energy that could be used really fruitfully in other creative ways to build your business, to expand business, which is why I think it's so important to address it. If you're experiencing, whether it's with a coach or a friend or a mentor, like really because it can become a dis-ease, and grow if unchecked. And it's really not that it's simple, not always easy, but it's pretty simple to kind of see what the genesis is and how you might work with it. So my recommendation to anyone listening is if you're feeling any of that fear, whether you're in fight, flight, or freeze, or it's just this nagging thing, really start to work on it, get some outside perspective, because as you say, it really is an energy suck that takes valuable resources away from other creative endeavors.
Yeah. And this is a good transition because the last thing I was going to ask you on this topic of fear was about the role of a support network. What do you see when you go through coaching with people who do tend to push through and overcome fears and get into bigger and bigger, challenges in life versus the ones who kind of get stuck? Does that support network play a big role, and what works?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just talk about my own experience. I am a coach, but I have a coach, right? And I think it's so important. Um, Yeah, I mean, even in my own life and work, pushing beyond what is comfortable has continually helped me grow and helped my business grow. And I just know me, that wouldn't be possible without an external partner, kind of constantly holding up the mirror and offering reflections. This is what you're up to. Why is this just what you're up to? Kind of to your point earlier, what do you mean you want to play small? Or what's next? And so it's constantly having that, for me, that partner with their hand on my back, like just pushing, edging forward. Because it really is all about the level of self-awareness. Because with awareness is gift, right? And with awareness, we can make change. But without it, we're going to stay stuck.
My personal experience has been the same with whether it's been a mix of things. I think we all have like a blend of support network that works for us, and it probably shifts and changes. But
friends, mentors, coaches.
Yeah, exactly. And but you're right. Like having somebody to kind of call me when I'm worrying about this, and this, and they're like, dude, that doesn't matter. Like, why is that? Why are you worried about that? And then I just actually get into this thought of like, oh yeah, why am I worried about this? Is this really real? Is there data here? And like, those kind of conversations are super important to have. The other thing that I find helpful about a support network is seeing people at both ends of the spectrum, both further along from me from a business perspective and life sort of perspective, and behind me from a life perspective, because you gain a level of perspective by having both of those points of reference almost. So, again, like talking to a business owner who's stuck in a little six-figure agency that can barely, eke out a living from it. It's interesting to hear what they fear, and it gives me a lot of perspective in realizing, oh yeah, I used to be there. Like I remember that. That was not that long ago, and like look at the growth I've had. So that's good. And then on the other side, I again talk to people way bigger than me, doing way more successful financially, and I would look at them and think, oh, they can't be afraid of anything. They must be, have it all figured out. And it's like, no, they're still struggling with the same fundamental fears. Yeah. Yeah. It's like their bank accounts are bigger, but they're not really different as human beings than I am. And I think that's encouraging too, just to see they still worry about things. And then they can kind of put my little fears that I have in perspective too, because I'm not worrying about the same level of things they are. And so it's just, again, like that exposure and getting around a group of people that can all be honest with each other about, like this is what I'm afraid of and worrying about today is super powerful and just unlocks a ton of potential, I think.
100%. One thing oddly that I find in entrepreneurs is not all are sort of out in social and talking to other entrepreneurs. They get lost in their own little world in their home office or with their company, and they don't get that perspective that you're talking about, realizing that, oh, I'm not alone in feeling this or experiencing this. And here is, as you said, a company that was going through what I was going through 2 years ago. Oh, look at the growth that we've had. And here's the company that's doing 10 times what we're doing. Look what's possible. One thing I do want to point out, when I was 20, I heard this quote and it stuck with me ever since. It's a Jim Rohn quote. You are equal to the 5 people you spend the most time with. I think it's really important for folks to aim to have people around them that are really going to push them, that are going to challenge them, people that are really up to big things and pushing themselves, because who you're surrounded with is going to, in some ways, dictate how you show up as an entrepreneur and how much you push and how much you don't, and what you buy into in terms of fear and what you don't. So really vetting those people around you and making sure that they're high quality and people that are going to push you. Super important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a huge, it's something I've always sought to do, is seek out people that are further ahead of me, and just intentionally find ways to spend time with them. Or it's not always ahead and behind, like in this linear fashion, right? I mean, often what happens is your peers are at times you're ahead in
Yeah,
different
it's going to
levels and
be,
different kinds of things, right? Like, yeah, some days I've got it all figured out from a family perspective. Other days I'm like, oh my God, why did I have children? So it's like we're all always up and down at this stuff.
yeah.
But I think you're right. Like having this group around you that they can kind of, in some ways, you see the things that they're going through that are good, bads, the pulls and pushes is really, really helpful. Yeah. So all really good stuff.
That's where there are really good organizations out there like EO, like other masterminds, like places where people can find community and like-minded people that will help push them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about, I mean, this is mostly the focus of today's episode has been fear, but I'm actually kind of curious because this is years of business. We haven't had anybody on. What's hard about running a coaching business? Like, give me the hard sides and then we'll talk about the good sides and the fun stuff too.
The hard stuff, I think, is a lot of it is combating the name and kind of the fact that there's a billion out there and that do different things. One thing I find is there are people in the world that want support, but they don't really know what kind of support and from who. And so that's where this coaching thing can get very confusing for a consumer of it. Who do I engage? Do I just need a tactical business coach? Do I need some of the more like how I'm showing up mindset, executive performance coaching? Is it sales coaching? So one of the things that I really try and do is help educate people on what coaching consulting is, how they're different, and what is it that you might need that is unique to you and what the sort of field can offer. That's one thing. And gosh, just like everybody else, where's the next client coming from?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
We're just out hunting. We're just out kind of doing business development, creating pipelines. It's a very, very noisy field. So breaking through the noise is a challenge. It's why, like for me, my bread and butter has always been networking and relationship building, because there's tons of thought leadership out there that people can go to, and some of that is you need it. You need your brand and your presence out there, but the best thing that I've found is relationship networking.
Yeah, it's interesting in businesses. A lot of service businesses have the same challenge of like there is a somewhat problem aware audience out there, but they are not very solution aware, meaning that they know like they are stuck in their business, but they don't really know, am I supposed to go to a coach, a consultant, a mastermind? Like, and all those are valid options. Like really, there's no one right answer. And so the hard part there is that they're not really aware of the range of solutions and what might work best depending on them and their personality and everything. And there's not really an easy way. Like you said, it's like you have to kind of just educate them and show them a little bit and educate them, show them. I mean, it's a tough sell. And for that reason, I think. And then because of that, you're right. You get into the problem of like, well, the way to sell it is essentially build enough trust that people go, okay, Andy can tell me what I need, and I don't have to, go find what I need. It's like Andy's here to coach me through it. So
yeah, and we do that. There are people that come in and they just need like more of a mentor or a coach that's built the business or a business before to come in and help them see operationally where they need to make a couple of shifts and they're good. And we just refer that out. That's not what our specialty is or what lights me up. I like getting into the weeds with the human being because I believe that they are the driver of everything in their world.
yeah. And I say this over and over in this show, and I say it to everybody who asks me about it. It's like, I think tactics are a dime a dozen, and I don't think there's anything wrong with reading. I got plenty of books I've read, like about business tactics that'll make you a better like operator and stuff like that. That is not the hard part to me. Like that is the part that is like table stakes. Go read 3 books, you'll be fine. Like know the fundamentals of finance, know the fundamentals of sales. Like, yeah, that's probably all you need. Now, the hard part is the mental sort of blocks that you put in place for yourself because you're afraid, because you don't want to look like a failure, because you don't want to take that risk that looks like it's going to be another hill that you've got to, fight through. You don't want to stay up all night worrying about things. Like that is the limiter 100% of the time to me.
You're right. I mean, the tactics that will work are the tactics typically that you'll just do and stick with, right? There's 1,000 different ways to build and run a business. You can go in a bookstore and you can see it because everybody's got an opinion. That's not the differentiator. The differentiator is the person that will stay in the game long enough to make a success of it.
Absolutely. Awesome, Andy. This is always fun to connect. I have one last question for you because I know you're a big reader. You've recommended me plenty of books. So what have you been impacted by lately as far as books you've read?
I'm reading a book right now by Eddie Jaku, The Happiest Man on Earth. And it's just a beautiful, heartbreaking story. He's a gentleman that was an engineer and lived through the Holocaust. So it's a tale of tragedy and heartbreak, but the message essentially is that no one can take away from you your ability to choose how you encounter and react to anything that's in front of you, which I think is such an incredible lesson for us all to learn, because a lot of folks, myself included at times, can fall victim, I'm putting up air quotes, those that are listening, fall victim to external circumstance and feel as if we're a victim. The truth of the matter is those external circumstances on some level happen to everybody in different ways. It's part of life. The one thing that we do have, if we exercise it, is our ability to choose how we react to the things that happen in life. And I find that to be such an empowering lesson. So it's a beautiful book. Highly recommend it. Super easy read, just a beautiful human.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm very much of that mindset. I think you kind of have to be. I don't know. I meet very few entrepreneurs who get beyond the just starting level who operate in that mindset of like, why is this happening to me? And like they're very, we tend to be a group with high agency and belief that we can affect the world around us. Otherwise, why the hell would you do this? Because it's very, a lot of bad shit's going to happen to you if you run a business for 10 years. Like just statistically, you're going to have bad years. So I think what's really, again, going back to that support network is surrounding yourself with other entrepreneurs who have that high level of agency and believe that they have can change what they can change and they're accepting of the things they can't, right? That whole mantra. It's very empowering too, because it reminds you that, we all go through bad shit. And that doesn't mean it's an excuse to just throw up your hands and like throwing the towel on it. It's like, yeah, it's going to happen.
And if we can, you were talking earlier, I know you're wrapping this up, but I just want to draw this in. You're talking about the energy that the fear and the worry and the uncertainty can steal. I always think of like Swiss Army knife as an example. I don't know if you know their story. Back in right around 9/11, when you could no longer fly with knives, their business tanked. And, one could say, well, the knife business is done. So what do? We'll just shutter our doors or become so worried. How do we get this item back into the hands of consumers? Well, no, they weren't consumed by the fear. They just thought creatively. And that's when they went into watches and luggage because we can move past so many obstacles that are in our way if we're thinking creatively. And one thing that is definitely going to stop that is fear, anxiety, and worry.
Great way to wrap it up. Thanks, Andy. This has been a lot of fun, as always.
Always love talking to you, my friend.
Where do people find out about Andy and Scaling Minds and follow up with you?
Yeah, so our website, scalingminds.com, get some information there. And I'm pretty active on the LinkedIn. Just look under Andy Hite. You'll find me there. I try and post some valuable things on occasion. So connect with me there.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. We'll talk soon. Thank you for watching this episode of Retain Trust. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds and it helps others find out about the show. And if you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, leave a comment. See you next time.